Damas y caballeros, bienvenidos a CAM 2023, jornada vespertina. Nuestra siguiente conferencia, Transición Energética y Combustibles Alternativos, será dictada por Edward Eddie Martínez, director de desarrollo del puerto de Corpus Christi. Lo recibimos con un fuerte aplauso.
Good afternoon, everybody. And first, I apologize for doing this in English. I do speak Spanish, but there are some words that are difficult with regard to this presentation, so perdóname. First, I would like to give a big thanks to the Maritime Chamber for their invitation. On behalf of my CEO, Sean Strawbridge, who is actually in Houston today speaking on the same topic, we are truly gracious to be present here providing the presentation about our port and what we're doing with regard to energy transition and alternative fuels. We have had a wonderful relationship, probably for the past 15 years, give or take, with the Port of Panama. We are actually sister cities, and we really enjoy the collaboration and the lessons learned between our two ports. I would like to begin with our presentation, give you an idea of what we're doing today. We just celebrated our 100-year anniversary. We started in 1922, and it's been 100 years, and it's been a phenomenal, amazing career here at the port. I really want to talk about some of the numbers and what we're doing today at our port. We are currently the #1 crude exporter in the United States today. Our little port is located in the Gulf of Mexico. It is 3 hours south of Houston, Texas, the Port of Houston, and about 2 hours into the Mexican border. So it is somewhat a little hidden, but when you start looking at the numbers, you start to realize that we hit well above our weight. We're doing a phenomenal job over the last couple of years. Not only are we #1 in crude exports to other nations, we are actually #2 in LNG exports as well. We are #1 in revenue tonnage. With regard to the United States, we moved over 7,700 vessels annually through our port. We manage about 30,000 acres of property. Now keep in mind, I want to just picture that a little bit when we talk about 30,000 acres. Our port is an artificial port. We own all of the land that is submerged under the water that leads to the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a lot of acreage that we manage that is submerged in addition to what is upland for development. The Port Authority does not operate actual terminals. We are not in the container business. Our primary cargoes are energy, crude, LNG, other alternative fuels, grains, dry bulk commodities, and steel and break bulk commodities. We support over 98,000 jobs just within the region itself that are all related to the port and the industries around there. And the economic impacts kind of give you a snapshot of how we support their community and the state and the nation. These are some of the companies, and you may recognize some of their logos here, that have done some significant investments in and around the port area, to the tune of $65 billion over the last decade alone. $12 billion of that is related foreign direct investment. Today, we are in discussion with many, many major foreign direct investment companies that also have an interest in developing this new energy transition. And we'll get to that, some of those details in a little bit. One of the biggest significant impacts that's going to happen in our area is the deepening and widening of our canal. You can see from the Gulf of Mexico, our channel extends about 30 miles. So from the Gulf of Mexico to the first, number one, the first leg segment, we have already completed the dredging on that. We are currently at 47 feet. We are dredging down to 54 feet or 16.5 meters. That will make us the deepest port in the Gulf of Mexico to be able to support our customers. The second and third phase are currently being dredged out right now. And again, this is deepening and widening the canal to allow for traffic, two-way traffic to flow back and forth. In addition, we are adding in what we call barge canals to allow the barges to be on the outside of the flow of the ships. That way we don't have any actual interruptions and can make a channel more efficient for the customers. The fourth leg that we see up here is going to be awarded this year. We have already received the funding from the federal government to support us on that, and it is a match. The Port of Corpus Christi will put about 25% of that, and the federal government will put about 75% of that. Now, we have started the process of dredging this canal for the last 30 years. It's taken us 30 years to get to this point. We started back in 1990s when I started at the port. I've been at the port 25 years. I started very young. So this is some of the efficiencies that we're showing that we will see some improvements. If we're moving a Suez Canal, Suez Max vessel, a tanker, that's capable today of loading about 850,000 barrels due to the draft limitations. Once we extend and deepen the draft, we'll be able to move just over 1 million barrels. The very large crude carriers today, their max capacity under our current draft at 1.2 million barrels. After the expansion, they'll be able to lift 1.5 million barrels. What does that do? It really creates a numerous amount of efficiencies of scale when we talk about an annual basis and the tremendous savings that we're going to be able to provide the buyers and sellers and marketers in the trade lanes. What we want to showcase here is just trying to be a prolific energy gateway. Our goal is really to be the energy gateway for the Americas. Now that's a very strategic goal to have, but you have to have a benchmark that you can reach that's not as easily reached. It's got to be something that you try to achieve. So, when it comes to energy supply, we have wind energy that enters our Port of Corpus Christi. We're just probably in the top 5% of the nation that brings in a lot of wind products to development in the area. Land development, over thousands of acres that we have available today for various developments with regard to hydrogen and derivatives itself that are comprised of the hydrogen region. We are deep draft. We are expanding that to 54 feet. We have a very skilled workforce. The air quality that we currently have today, regardless of the investment in the region with regard to heavy industry, is phenomenal. We have been able to maintain and keep our carbon footprint very, very low. Next for us is understanding what the hydrogen development project will look like and being able to implement a carbon management solution that will support existing industry today and the industry that will be coming in tomorrow. The map kind of gives you an indication of where we are located in the state of Texas. Today's energy flow with regard to LNG is really focused on the Asian markets that have to cross the Panama Canal from our area and going into Europe as well. The crude destinations that we're seeing, again, crossing the Panama, going into Asia, going into Europe, going into India, South Africa, and South America. And those continue to grow. One thing that we have the advantage of, at least in our areas, Texas is a huge producer of crude and natural gas. And we have pipelines that are connected from those regions that connect directly into the Port of Corpus Christi. And one thing about pipelines is once they're in, they don't get moved, right? Trade lanes can kind of switch, but if you've got a pipeline in the ground that has been invested and it's cost $1 billion, you don't tend to move it right away. So those arteries for crude and for gas will continue to feed our port for decades to come. We are positioning ourselves to be, again, the premier gateway for a hydrogen gateway to international markets with regard to hydrogen hub. We're number one in wind energy. We're number two in solar generation. We will be number one in solar generation within the next 5 years. Using those renewable and alternative energy sources is going to allow to be able to put together utilizing electrolyzers to produce hydrogen, which will be the future of energy. Now, it doesn't mean that we're moving away from traditional forms. We still will have oil and gas, but now we can add to the overall portfolio that the world is demanding right now, which is hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives, whether it's LNG as well, that continues to grow today, but whether that's a move in ammonia or methanol. And really, when we start looking at what's happening on a global scale, ports around the world should really start considering where they're going to position themselves to be within this plane. If you're reading any type of maritime news, you're going to be seeing that many of the container lines today are purchasing newer vessels that have the capability of alternative fuels, whether that's methanol, LNG, ammonia, and you need to have a mechanism for being able to fuel those vessels in your areas. We are looking at not only supporting those vessels, but also being a true producer in the region by supporting those industries that want to develop. What I'm showcasing here is really, it's our application. So in the United States, as in other parts of the world, the federal government is really focusing on what we call creating hydrogen hubs. They're locations within the region of the U.S. that will allow for the production of hydrogen, not only for domestic use, but also for international export to support our neighbors. The port has our own application to become a designated hydrogen hub. We were asked by the Department of Energy from the federal government to apply, and we've used some of these companies that are on here right now as part of our overall application that we submitted to the Department of Energy. So this kind of gives you an indication of the various hubs that are designated throughout the United States for, again, hydrogen hub designation. The Port of Corpus Christi just recently worked with the Permian, which is located in the west side Trans-Permian hub. Together we combined both of our applications to submit one entire application, grabbing their folks that they have an interest in development, including that into our Horizons application, and then submitting that together. This way, we anticipate about 4 to 5 different hubs throughout the entire nation that will be designated. We hope to be one of those and are making a great application that would support that in the future. But that application will allow somewhere between $6 to $7 billion of federal funding that will be available to support at least these small number of hubs. That funding itself can be used for not only infrastructure, but it can also be used to support these industries and jumpstart, the development of hydrogen and the hydrogen derivatives that we want to see in the future. Basically, let's try to push as much carbon neutral energy as possible. This is the one I was really focused in on with regard to our position with Trans-Permian Hub and the merger that we have together today. So what does the global trade look like so far? Well, with regard to the future of hydrogen and the trade flows today, we're seeing a lot of demand in the Asian markets today. Now, if you've been reading, the U.S. and probably about another 136 countries have identified 2050 as the ultimate goal for being carbon neutral. Well, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes many steps to get there. So from our standpoint, we are providing, availability of resources with regard to land, deep water access, connectivity, to be able for these companies to develop and then be able to move those molecules, those energy molecules, to international markets in Asia, in Europe, in India, and other far-reaching continents. Coupled with the development of hydrogen, the Port of Corpus Christi is implementing a carbon capture system approach. Understanding not everything can be created as green using energy, using electricity and electrolyzers, but the opportunity to create hydrogen using natural gas. Now, if we create that and couple that with carbon capture, being able to capture the CO2, the carbon dioxide created from that, then we can deploy a deep well system, and then the hydrogen derivatives, again, either through ammonia delivery or methanol delivery, can be shipped and produced in a central area to international markets. So the port is really spearheading a lot of those discussions today in our region, so that companies that, again, want to utilize different forms to create their hydrogen have the opportunity to do that at a reduced rate, and they'll be able to sequester their carbon. Not only have we identified over, we have identified over 30, let me get back one. I didn't do it. Okay. So the Port of Corpus Christi has identified over 30,000 acres of port-owned property today that we actually own. So under those 30,000 acres, we have partnered up with a company called Howard Synergy and Talos. Those two entities right there together are managing the porous ground that will be able to hold a lot of the carbon capture from existing entities today and those that we anticipate to have in the future. What you're seeing here is the coastline of the state of Texas. So the port has been spearheading along with the Texas state to identify offshore capabilities of deep well sequestration. That would be a huge game changer for supporting industries in the region today that are emitters of carbon, to be able to capture that, move that to offshore deployment, deep well in offshore waters, and sequester that there. What are we doing? How are we supporting? Well, we're not only engaged with industry itself, we're partnered in with the Texas General Land Office of the state of Texas, with the federal government as well, and identifying how we might be able to support on port property by building and constructing a pipeline that connect all of the existing industries to move that carbon from existing locations to growing locations to eventually to offshore. Now, the pipe would be built on port-owned properties, which would make it a lot easier, being that we manage that. We would not oversee the entire project. We are a landlord port, so we would enter into an agreement for someone that has that specialty, but it would allow these existing companies that are emitters today to be able to connect into that pipeline. As long as they have the technology, they can connect into that and be able to move and sequester that carbon reduction to deep water wells in the Gulf of Mexico. So really, our role with regard to carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration is, one, to send a clear signal that we are producing a centralized solution that can benefit existing and new coming companies. Cultivate new opportunities for new projects, such as hydrogen development and production. Identify and permit the routes that are going to be used to capture the CO2 delivery infrastructure. Lease port-owned property that we own today to these entities for deep well injection and storage provide a logistical commercial connection for entities with regard to CCS, deploy capital where we need to. So the port does have capital at our disposal that we can offer to support these projects. Now, as a governmental agency, we can't enter into any type of JVs, but we can support with infrastructure, whether that's a dock, facility, pipeline. Those are things that we can deploy dollars to support and reduce the overall risk of these entities wanting to come into the region. Next is just really being able to leverage other capital to support the developments to move forward and really continue to advocate and be a voice for not only industry, but for other ports that have an interest in developing and reducing their carbon footprint as well. That's my presentation. I really want to thank you for your time, and gracias.
Invitamos a Carmen Márquez, del Comité Organizador de Cannes 2023, para hacer entrega de un obsequio y reconocimiento a Edward Eddie Martínez, Director de Desarrollo del Puerto de Corpus Christi. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Fuerte el aplauso. Agradecemos nuevamente su participación. Y continuando con nuestra agenda, tenemos información de parte de DNV.
To help the industry navigate a way forward, our 6th Maritime Forecast to 2050 report offers a fresh outlook on regulations, drivers, technologies, and fuel availability. It considers several critical issues underpinning the decarbonisation challenge. What the future fuel mix could look like, ways to find the most efficient and cost-effective ship designs, and the potential impact of regional policy interventions like green corridors.
Nos acompaña el capitán Antonio Prestigiacomo. Él es gerente de desarrollo de negocios y líder de la Academia Marítima Región de las Américas de DNV. Lo recibimos con un fuerte aplauso.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having us. Maritime Forecast to 2050 is one of the DNV suite that of the Energy Transitions Outlooks report. This report will give it to you an update on fuel availability, decarbonization cost, and whatever will be needed to bring us to the decarbonizations as per our ambitions. It's clear that the shipping won't decarbonize. We want to keep our world beautiful and safe for our kids, but we don't know yet the pace. What will be the pace of the futures? 2050, as many of us would like, as many cargo owners are aiming to, or will be the IMO ambition towards 2100? From our maritime forecast to 2050, we can realize that fuel transition in the shipping is accelerating, and the key fuel technology will be available in 3-8 years. Fuel transition at sea hinges around the development in land. So faster we go inland with the infrastructure and the fuel availability, faster we will decarbonize our shipping. Shipping decarbonizations will require investment for onboard technology, but even greater in land. it's clear that what will be the fuel mix will depend by the availability, policy ambitions, and price. At the meantime, ships operators will need to have a flexible transitions plan in order to bring on board the right energy efficiency technology, key fuel technology, and reduce carbon risk. In this maritime forecast, we will consider, and I hope you will read it, we will consider all these aspects. So we will consider the regulations that will come thereafter, that will drive the ship's owner and industry towards the decarbonizations. The development of technology, key fuel technology, that will allow us to improve energy efficiency or to use the fuel of the futures will determine which technology will go on board. The meantime, productions of fuels, distributions will determine the availability in the different port and the cost associated. Considering all these aspects, we have developed tools that will allow us to analyze different fuel uptake scenarios. These models, these scenarios, they don't give to you exactly how the futures will be, but will help the industry and the ships operators to take robust decisions and bring ahead the right energy transitions plan. As we know, nowadays, we have several regulations, regulators and drivers. All these drivers will drive the decarbonizations. Will drive the decarbonizations, however, at the moment there is uncertainty regarding the pace. Again, we have to decarbonize by 2050 or by 2100, or what IMO will decide during the next months. Year 2022 was a year where we agreed, we developed new standards, new framework, new requirements. This year, 2023, is the years where CII, Carbon Index Indicator, and the EEXI, Energy Efficiency Indicator for existing vessels, have been implemented. And this, for sure, will have an impact on the cost of the ships, and will have an impact on the routings of these, and whatever the fuel or technology we will install on board. What is clear that if we want to reduce the emissions of 5% based upon 2008 date lines, we will need 40% reduce emissions, we will have 5% of carbon neutral fuel. So, if we want to reduce of 40% emissions for 2030 by 40%, we will need 5% carbon neutral fuel. In the meantime, there is a discussions regarding fuel standards at the European level and at IMO level, and also cargo owners. They have their own ambitions. So their ambition is to achieve net zero target by 2050. For doing that, they will need to buy low or zero carbon shippings. Nowadays, if we want access to more capital, we will need to demonstrate that our shipping has a reduced environmental footprint, while bank and finance institution, they will need to report their portfolio compliance towards sustainable investment taxonomy. The shippings in the shipping, the fuel transitions is already going on. From our data, we see that from 2019 to 2022, the number of vessels on order book fueled by alternative fuel solution has tripled, while by gross tonnage, the 30% of the gross tonnage in new order book is fueled by LNG. To have this great energy transition plan, we need to have innovative technology. This figure shows you the maturity level of the different key fuel technology. As you can see, methanol is already developed, followed by ammonia, hydrogen on short sea segment, and CCS, carbon capture storage technology. We are talking about the technology, requirement, drivers, but what is needed more than anything else, carbon neutral fuel and availability of this carbon neutral fuel wherever the ships are trading. We divide the carbon neutral fuel in three big families: biofuel, electrofuel, and blue fuel. In the future, if sustainable mass will become available, biofuels will be the preferred carbon neutral fuel. Why? Because of the simplicity of convert biomass to energy-dense hydrocarbons. Electricity to be used for electrofuels should be renewable electricity. While we will need CCS on land infrastructures for producing our blue fuels, at the same time, we will need onboard CCS for using certain type of fuel and blue fuels. It's clear that the shipping cannot decarbonize by its own alone. We say that the collaborations is the fuel of the futures. Collaborations amongst authority and amongst all the industry partners. For example, if biomass will be available in the futures, we can have biofuel to be used for aviation and shipping instead to be used for the productions of electricity. From all these data, from all this uncertainty, we develop a model we call greenhouse gas pathways model. In these models, we will consider the applicable requirement, we will consider the global shippings, we will consider ship by ships or the relevant new technology. And this model will allow us to examine 24 fuel mix scenarios that again, they don't give us the certainty of the futures, but will allow us to bring in actions robust decision, a good energy transitions plan. These are the results from our 24 scenario. These are some scenarios where you can see we have two different ambitions, decarbonization by 2050 and decarbonizations according to our ambitions. In all scenarios, we can see that although energy efficiency, improvement of logistic process, speed reductions are important and allow us to reduce emissions, fuel, carbon neutral fuel, that will make the difference. So availability and distributions of those fuels is a must. As you can see on both ambitions, IMO ambition and decarbonizations, we can see that fossil fuel oil are going to be reduced, towards elimination 2050, while LNG fossil use will be increased for a certain times. It's clear that if LNG price is non-competitive, then we will have other carbon-neutral fuel to be used, such as MGO and ammonia. In the years, we will have carbon-neutral fuel to be used, so MGO and LNG. And as you see, in both scenarios, we have an increment of the use of those. It's clear that we use a different fuel, but we need to understand how much investment we will take in the shipping, how the designs of the vessel will be affected, because remember, with the fuel, different fuel change their energy density, so the space for the fuels will be different. If we have more space for fuel, then we have less space for cargo, and perhaps we will need to change our trading pattern as well. Again, we have ammonias and methanols that they will compete each others, and everything, so the competition will be based upon technology and the cost associated to the use of these fuels. Fuel, technology, drivers, trading pattern change, they will drive huge investment on board, but also investment in land. As you can see, we will need more investment if we want to decarbonize by 2050 than if we follow the IMO ambitions. I believe is around the investment that we need for decarbonization by 2050 is 2.5 times what we need for the IMO ambitions. And you see also that the electrofuels are the most expensive in the different scenario. Sorry. To conclude, from the maritime forecast to 2050, we see that we have several implications that we will need to implement and consider in our energy transitions. First of all, we need to develop new fuels. We will need to have the right infrastructures and supply chains in place, and 5% of the fuel should be carbon neutral by 2030. We will need to have clear criteria for the fuel, but also for the ships, and we will need to increase the productions of those carbon neutral fuels. Higher investment will be needed for onboard technology, new shipping, but also especially ashores. At the end, our ships operators and cargo owners, they will need to have the right transition plan. They will need to have ship with a certain fuel flexibility and fuel-ready solutions. Those are the implications, and as we say, the fuel of the futures is collaborations. So collaborations will help all of us to achieve our main goal. Thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you.
With more than 10,000 users across the maritime industry, the DNV's Alternative Fuels Insight platform is here to accelerate shipping's transition to a cleaner, more sustainable future. Covering both alternative fuel technology for vessels and bunkering infrastructure, DNV's Alternative Fuels Insight platform gives you a complete overview of the development and uptake of alternative fuels and technologies. The platform is open for everyone to access this reliable and up-to-date data via DNV's Veracity platform. When you are considering a new fuel, you need to know, is there sufficient production capacity? Do the distribution facilities cover my operations? Is the bunkering infrastructure in place? And so much more. That's why the AFI provides you with flexible visualizations based on quality assured data and technical insights, helping you make informed choices. AFI provides detailed statistics for the full spectrum of fuels and technologies: LNG, ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, LPG, as well as scrubber and battery technology. You can track the yearly uptake of alternative fuels and benchmark against conventional options on new contracts, order book, ships in operation, and fuel prices. And a wide range of filtering options allows you to create your own graphs. As the AFI is constantly being updated with the latest weekly regional fuel prices, you can easily compare fuels across regions. For shipping to reach its decarbonization goals, we need more collaboration. It's the true fuel of the future. That's why AFI has been developed from the beginning with support from many industry partners, building links between suppliers, owners, charters, and stakeholders across shipping and beyond. And because the maritime fuel landscape is constantly evolving, we incorporate user updates on existing and new fuel and infrastructure projects. AFI, your window on the fuels and technologies that will shape the future of shipping.
Gracias a DNV por su contribución. Vamos a iniciar el panel de combustibles alternativos. Nos acompaña en la moderación José Alberto Rosas, en representación de ABL. Lo recibimos con un fuerte aplauso. Los especialistas Arsenio Domínguez, de la Organización Marítima Internacional, OMI. Y Alexis Rodríguez, en representación de Merck. También se une el capitán Antonio Presti Giacomo. Adelante, José Alberto.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. We have today a wide representation of the different stakeholders of the shipping industry in order to discuss a very complex subject. We have Mr. Arsenio Domínguez on behalf of the IMO. He will give us the point of view of the regulatory body in charge of dealing at the international level about the decarbonization of the industry. We have a representative of a shipping line from Maersk, Mr. Alexis Rodríguez. He's an environmental expert. He will give us the point of view of the segment of the industry that will take the decisions about the technologies to be adopted and the fuels to be used, and the segment that will be paying for these changes. And we have also Captain Antonio Presti Giacomo. He is a representative of a classification society, which is a regulatory body also, but also they are an evaluator of the technologies and the implication not only from the point of view of the environment, but also about safety issues. And they are in a unique position between the different stakeholders, including ship owners, flag states, and other maritime organizations. So we have a short time. We will go directly to the first question. We have developed some topics, and we will make a round table of discussions. Okay? I hope we have time to answer some questions from the audience. The first topic is that the setup of a clear regulatory framework is crucial for the decarbonization of the shipping industry. However, there are still discussions at IMO about the emission targets towards 2050 and the approach for accounting emissions. How do you think this may be affecting the investments in alternative fuels in the shipping industry. Arsenio, can you please give us your point of view as a regulator?
I like the fact that you start with me from the regulator and to give you an opinion of what the sector is expecting from us. First of all, congratulations on the International Day of the Women. And of course, thank you to CAM for this very kind invitation. When we adopted the strategy in 2018, that's when we actually made the decision that we were going to revise it by this year. So the decision is not something new, and we haven't really moved away from that. We continue to receive information and requests from the industry in general in order to give more clarity. And actually, from Antonio's presentation, it's quite easy to follow that. In the last two sessions of the committee of the MEPC, the Marine Environment Protection Committee, the member states of the organizations have reiterated their commitment to revise the strategy and in particular to strengthen the level of ambitions. At the same time, we have been receiving several proposals and support towards the decarbonization of the industry by 2050. The concerns also have been highlighted and raised, and this is where we're working right now. We understand, and as you just heard from that very good presentation from DNV, that we're not focusing on one solution. This is a transition, it's a big challenge for the industry. It is recognized at the organization, but also focusing and working on the member states on the opportunities that this transition is actually going to bring to the sector. It's fuel agnostic, so we're not focusing right now on just one type of fuel. There is a transition, so we're not going to immediately phase out the conventional fuels. It is going to be driven by market, but of course, as the new fuels become more available and widely used, the markets would actually adapt the same way. We had similar experiences with the IMO 2020 and other situations in the past. And at the same time, this technological development, like CCS, that it's continued to progress. And we expect from the projections that have been put forward to the organization when we have these conversations that the alternative fuels as well as the new technology will be in place at a larger scale by 2020, by mid-30s. At the same time, the organization is also considering the economic measures that will support this transition. And this is all the debates that we are actually leaning on towards the next session in July this year. The main decision is the revision of the strategy and strengthening the level of ambitions. Then we will move to the technical operational measures. We're working in the economic measures. We're working in parallel with the life cycle assessment. And of course, it's the well to wake, time to wake. We can control the time to wake. We need to work further with the industries, other sectors as well, for the time to well to wake. And of course, one call that you just heard and that we continue to raise is when governments develop the alternative fuels, when they focus on the new technologies and the transitions and the opportunities that are there, such as what we heard from the presentations of the Port of Corpus Christi, to also look at the needs for the shipping sector. Don't put just other sectors like aviation or national industries on top of the shipping sector. What we need is that collaboration, that we're also going to have the same level of ambitions, and that we're going to be treated in a way that is also urgent for us to have those.
Okay. Antonio, you covered to some extent this topic in your presentation. Would you like to add something about it, about this influence?
Yes, so our position is that if IMO is going to strengthen the ambitions, so let's say instead of 2100 we say 2050, then in that case it will be a great, strong signal that will be sent to the shippings and to the energy producer. So in that circumstance, the energy producer and the shipping owner, they needed to start to invest. They needed to start to build up these few carbon neutral fuel supplies around the world. But in the meantime, we will have a couple of challenges. One challenge is that we will need really new ships design criteria because we need to go fast. And at the same time, the challenge could be, what if the energy producers, they will not receive enough request of carbon neutral fuels. So everything is based on demand. So everything we believe that will be driven by the IMO regulations or cargo owners requirement. This is important. And how we are going to enforce those regulations, right? Because if we want to talk about the CII, at the moment, yes, there are requirements that are in place, but the enforcement is quite ambiguous. So it's left to the good actions of the operators to put perfectly in force. Thank you.
Alexis, as a ship operator, what do you think about this?
Well, really interesting. First, I want to join the celebration today of International Women's Day, also remarking our commitment for 2025 for more than 4% of women in management team by Maersk. So that is really important that we want to remark. Regarding the position, I think that Maersk thinks that I am almost agree in a net zero goals. That is really important, and also deliver, for example, by 2030, something that will dry off about the new construction of vessels, taking into account the new technologies and also net zero goals. In addition, the market-based measures should be addressed, and that is really important, but taking into account the development countries and also how they can be involved at the benefit of that measures. But it's really important that, for example, in our case, that we are talking about regulation is that we need to commit, and that is an example that we made before. We have a 100% green end-to-end net zero by 2040. This is really important because our operators should, and in the case of Maersk, we are doing ourselves not only thinking in ocean, but also in logistics sector as an integrator. And that is really important that we take into account for future negotiations because we are thinking about all the logistics sector.
There is a gap in the cost of alternative fuels estimated between 6 to 8 times in comparison to the traditional fuel oils. Do you think that the introduction of a carbon levy tax at the international level will help the industry to invest further or faster in alternative fuels? Antonio, I would like you to listen that from you.
So we think that only if these international requirements will be high enough, then in that case, yes, we will start to invest in carbon neutral fuel. Well, because we have to consider all the investment that are needed for the technology and for the acquisition of this carbon neutral fuel. So if this international levy tax is high enough, yes. If it's not, then I don't think we will obtain really the goal that we want to achieve. So we need to create the right conditions, and we have to bring something that really send a strong signal to all parties.
This is under current discussion at IMO.
That's correct, and I like the fact that you started with a levy because the decision has not been made whether it's going to be a levy or any other type of what we refer to now as an economic measure. Also, when we actually look into the discussions for setting a price on whatever economic measure we put into place, there are several areas that we need to look into. And it's not just the economic impact that it's going to have directly on the fleet. We need to do the impact on the states, those that actually are exporting and are from regions where the trade actually has a longer route. We also have to look into how the funds are going to be used, and those are the conversations that we're going to have. How we're going to help, in particular, developing states, small island developing states, and least developed countries to actually join the decarbonization transition and not to be left behind. So all these areas have to be put on the table. We are gathering all the necessary analysis and information in order to make an informed decision that would actually guarantee that the revenues will be used to assist the sector to meet the transition goals, at the same time not to create a negative impact on states and avoid that the global society then ends up actually with an increased cost of shipping trade.
Alexis, Maersk has announced heavy investments in alternative fuels for the future. What do you think about this issue?
Well, I think that it's really important to remark something. who is first, the chicken or the egg? And when we talk about market-based measures, we are talking about a long-term or a future that is unclear. And that is the reason, for example, we order more than 19 vessels with methanol. And we state 9 partnerships with strategic around the world to have the methanol to switch to dual engines. And that is really important, taking into account that if we begin the process to build that vessels, we will have or work together with that partnership to have the fuel. And independently in the time frame, if there is a market base or not. That is, I think that is our position to create the market, create the demand, and then have the vessels to have net zero commitments that we adopt to 2040.
Some of the alternative fuels are carbon-based fuels, such as LNG and LPG. And there is a paradigm with these fuels because from one side, they are carbon fuel based, but from the other side, they have the most widely developed infrastructure from the production to the supply chain worldwide. Do you think that these carbon-based alternative fuels will be only transitional and will be effective only until 2050? Antonio, can you please give your thoughts?
So in matter of LNG, we believe that even in the future, LNG will be, let's say, a fuel key player. So also in these carbon neutrals, fuel mix. Why? Because you can have bio LNG, or you can have electro synthetics LNG. So in one case, if you have the bioenergy, then you will use the conversion of the biomass, and the biomass are related to sewage system, wastewater treatment systems. While if we won't have the electro fuels or the synthetics LNG, then we have to use renewable CO2. Plus, we have to use hydrogen that has been made using renewable energy. So it's a beautiful, technology, and we have to be there, to produce, to work, and then everything could be feasible. It's just a matter to invest, take our times, and bring all together in all the different parties.
So the source of the fuel will change toward 2050. This is your impression?
2000, yes.
Okay.
Yes. This is what we believe.
Arsenio, what are your thoughts about the carbon-based fuels?
That's the projection. I would be lying to you if I'm going to sit here and say that I'm a complete expert on all the new alternative fuels that are under production. But the projection and the information that the member states have been working on and providing to the organization is basically that. We're working into not passing on the emissions to other sectors, and that's why on the life cycle assessment we're actually looking into the life of the fuels as well. But yes, it's a transitional period with the end goal of having zero carbon fuels. And the intention is, of course, that in any generations and any use of hydrogens, for example, is on the areas where they will be able to assist in the production of the new fuels. We are looking at the same time in parallel with all the safety, all these new fuels as well as the training requirements that we'll need it, because it's a long-term transition. It's not something that is going to happen in the next couple of years, but the projection is exactly the same one as Antonio has mentioned.
Alexis, your company have not talked about LNG for fusion plants. What are your thoughts?
Well, first, when we talk about an ambitious strategy as us, we need to figure out that we have a limited GHG reduction potential when we are talking about LNG. Also, LNG is a fossil fuel, and we need to think about the life cycle assessment. That is really important because we understand, as Arsenio said before, wheel to wheel, and that is a really interesting part when we are making the analysis of fuels. On the other hand, the fuel LNG, for example, when you are talking a long term, they will transform in e-LNG or the synthetic LNG. So at the end, we maintain with methanol, and we think that we need a fuel that will address our goals to be net zero in 2040.
Panama is a maritime hub. We have a very strong maritime business in Panama, and one of the main sectors of our industry here is the bunkering industry. So it is expected that in the future, this change to alternative fuels will affect the business of the local bunkering industry. What do you recommend to our local bunkering industry to adapt or to make the transition as a service provider of alternative fuels in the future? Antonio, can you please?
So there is the International Associations of Port and Harbour that they are developing a tool to make the different port ready for the future's fuel transitions. So first recommendation is to see which tools and which plans they will need to implement for the futures. Then it's important to identify the fuel used by the shippings that use Panama as a hub, and perhaps implement a green shipping corridors between Panama and the other location. So green shipping corridors are these corridors at sea where your shipping will use a particular fuels, technology, and this will create a mini green environment and at sea. So it's clear that also there collaboration from all parties is needed. And we have already several green shipping corridors. I believe the longest one is between Singapore and Rotterdam, then maybe some in Europe, someone in the States by Vancouver in the plan. So there are, it's clear that if you want to have these green corridors, then you need to have the right fuel availability from point A to point B.
Do you think that incentives will we require in order to promote this investment by the industry?
Sorry, can I say?
Do you think some incentive will be required by the...
will become required?
Yes, in order to promote investments.
And then we have to ask to IMO if it will be required.
Okay. There is some fun that is under discussion also.
I'm used to get those questions bounced to me. That's absolutely fine. I'll give you the general answer because we looked after all the member states of the organization. We just reviewed some of the guidance that we provide to member states in relation of actions that we invite them to do for this. And it's to carry out the national plans for fusion investments, for the fusion transition to the green fuels, what infrastructure, what are the trading routes that are in place. At the same time, the green corridors were included there as part of those experiences that will provide to the countries the opportunity to plan ahead and to gather necessary information as to what is it that is going to be needed, where can they focus the development. We encourage more and more partnerships, north to south and south to south. You just heard from the presentation of Corpus Christi Sport how they're actually moving towards renewable operations and renewable energies. And that's the kind of encouragements that we are actually keep providing to the member states. What we're setting up is several projects and partnerships in order to gather that information, gather the data, include some member states of the organization to start being part of those processes and then plan ahead, but not to wait until the final decision is made. We always talk on the early movers. We call for member states to also be early movers in this transitional period.
Alexis, you are a potential client for the bunker industry in alternative fuels in the future. What are your recommendations?
Well, Maersk, as a logistic integrator end-to-end, want to send a clear message about how many fuel we need. But the important part at the beginning is that, for example, we are using the SBTI standards. And that is something clear that we need to understand when we are talking of different kind of fuels. Talking about methanol, for example, annually they produce, and around the world, we produce more than 30,000 tons of fuel. But we are hoping that 2025, we need at least more than 700,000 tons of methanol. And if we are talking about 2030, we are talking about more than 5 million tons of methanol. So more clear, I think that this is a better message that we want to send.
Biofuels are considered a promising alternative fuels in the future because it does not require significant modification on board the ships for their use. And also, the current supply chain and production infrastructure could be used to some scope. worldwide. What are the main limitations for the adoption of biofuels in the future? And if you think that Latin America has a role for the development of biofuels for shipping industry. I will start with you, Alexis.
Okay,
Please.
of course. I will speak a little bit about numbers. Recent studies mark that 68% of the Latin American customers are willing to make change about all the environmental problems. So that is a big market that we can talk about. But the problems in Latin America that we are facing is about regulations. We only think that we are in Latin America, but we have so many regulations around the world, in addition to the new ones, that the IMO, that with the member states and all that, are making more pressure to our markets. And we will need to make this change before these regulations will enter in force. In addition, we need to think about the supply chain. The customers are willing that all the supply chains will have clean fuels around all the logistic part and also vessels, and that is really important. But my message to our region is to take into account the just transition. We are a big region with different particularities of each country, and we need to address each country and take into account that we can be the leaders, but we need all the supply chains in different countries to fill the gap that we have it in our region.
Arsenio.
Biofuels?
Biofuels, yes.
As I mentioned earlier, the decisions of the organizations are right now that what we're approaching is fuel agnostic. So there are proposals on biofuels. There are countries around the world already that are actually increasing their production of biofuels. There's still the perception, and it's something that we are analyzing, of what is the negative impact the biofuels may have in other sectors, for example, the agriculture. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on, but it's not being discounted, it's not being dismissed, because it's a very relatively straightforward solution in the production of alternative fuels that can be actually available in an increasing number and quantities in a shorter period of time than other fuels like ammonia or methanol.
Antonio, you have some thoughts about this?
Yes, so biofuels is quite used right now in different segments. There are some technical challenges that are manageable. We have biomass available, but we will need to invest in order to bridge the gap between productions and availability. According to our data that you can see in our alternative fuel insight platforms, there is a lot of availabilities in Latin America. However, we will need also criteria to be implemented in order to establish how much biofuel use is affecting the reductions in emissions, because still for that we will not have in place the relevant fuel standards. And now that we have been talking about the technology and fuel, what is important that we never have to forget that the crew, they will need the relevant training as well in order to use the new technology, in order to handle the new fuel. And we did a study, and we expect that if we achieve the 2050 ambitions, we will need 700,000 crew members to be trained in accordance with new technology and new fuels. You know, we should never forget that the crew is handling vessels.
Yeah, absolutely. We cannot create safety issues, increase of risk because of environmental matters.
Safety first. So if we find a solution to decarbonize the global shipping, that the solution should be safest for environment, the people on board, and anyone else that is around. Yeah.
Okay, we have 4 minutes. Maybe we can check some of the questions from the audience. Which challenges can you mention were identified while carrying out the IMO 2023 plans regarding the reduction of carbon emissions? How difficult and costly can to be other vessels and fleet to stay compliant with new regulation? This is a long question, huh? And standards. Are older ships getting out of commission? I guess maybe this is for you, Arsenio.
You think so?
I guess.
I think the focus here on is what will be the effect on the existing fleet. Probably, if I can read it correctly, we have introduced already at the organization, operational and technical measures for the existing fleet. But it is clear that the transition to decarbonize the industry will rely mainly on the new fuels and the new technology. And of course, it is expected that for all the vessels, it's always going to be more difficult, more costly to actually then be able to retrofit or meet with the requirements. And this is, again, part of that transition. And as has been mentioned, we're looking for the expectations of the new generation of vessels. When it comes to challenges, I mean, we can spend a lot of time just listing out the several challenges that are there. There's still unknowns on the availability, the safety aspects of the fuels, the technology that is going to be available. It's all being developed, and we get more and more projects where it says that by 2024, 2025, we will get additional information. And at the same time, is that analysis that we continue to do with every measure that we put in place, which is the impact that these measures will have on the states, on the countries themselves.
Okay, another question. Do you consider that ex-border policy should be the real global catalyst on driving cohesive and equitable decarbonization? I will drive to Antonio. You are in a position dealing with the industry and regulatory body. Do you have any thoughts about this question?
Yeah, absolutely. As we mentioned before, regulations and new requirements will be the drivers of decarbonizations. These will lead, the ships operators, energy producers to invest times and money in new solutions. However, we need to consider that any local reality has their different need, their different challenge. Panama has a different segment to support than, for example, from Miami. So we need to consider, I believe, all these aspects. And regarding the first questions, I will not. Yes, we have a challenge. Yes, we have a problem to solve. But if we put our attention towards a solutions, then we will feel always better, and we will look in a different way the future that is coming.
Alexis, you have any thoughts about these two questions?
I have maybe a question. What if I change the business as usual, and we think that our driver for decarbonization is the final customer? It's us that are willing to have more products with less emissions, with a supply chain clean, and we can demand as customers to everyone to push over the wheel in decarbonization. So I think that the driver now is our customers, and how we can give a better solutions to them, and also a better and more clean products.
Yes. There is another question. Maybe we can have a very short answer. I guess I cannot see very well, but I guess it's related with the conflict between, using land instead of producing food and producing alternative fuels like biofuels. You have any thought for that?
I can only say, for example, it's important to have a standard. That's the reason I mentioned the SBTI, because we can make conflicts to produce methanol with land or feedstock. That is something really important when you are talking about new alternative fuels. Is how you make that conflict and the standard that you will use.
Yeah, but the question is related with the conflict, I guess, regarding food chain instead of biomass production. This is the question. But is how will the strengthening of IMO regulation regarding carbon neutrality and alternative fuel will affect the food chain of supply as more biomass is used for alternative fuels?
I think that's similar to what actually kind of I've mentioned earlier when we talk about that biofuels are still being considered in these countries that actually have the production and it's rolling out there. But the concern is on the overall sustainability in general as a topic that by creating alternative fuels, we don't really displace and affect other sectors like the food chains, and that's what I mentioned, agriculture. But this is something that, we're not working in isolation here. We regulate shipping, but we actually are in contact with other UN agencies in relation to what will be a negative effect into the decisions that we take.
Antonio, any thought regarding this third question? from your side?
I think that perhaps biomass could be developed, produced from something else as well. We were talking about the wastewater, sewage. Yes, it will affect the food chains. Maybe it could be something related, but will take for us also some extra times to identify what will be the most suitable alternative fuel for the future. That's why we say as a beginning, if sufficient sustainable biomass will be available, then biofuel will be the preferred fuel. So vice versa, then we have alternative fuel solution that we can put in place.
Okay. We have no time. We have to conclude here. Thank you very much. Also, happy Women's Day to all the women of the shipping industry. And I would like to wish Arsenio fair winds in your campaign for the IMO General Secretariat campaign. Okay, I hope you are success on this matter.
Invitamos a Keith Jeep, René Gómez, Enrique Clement y Michelle de la Osa para hacer entrega de obsequios y reconocimientos a nuestros especialistas de este panel Combustibles Alternativos. Hacemos entrega de los reconocimientos a nuestros expertos y nos preparamos para cambiar el formato de la siguiente conferencia. El equipo de producción, vamos a cambiar el formato entonces para continuar con la siguiente conferencia. Con un fuerte aplauso despedimos a nuestros especialistas. Y avanzamos con nuestra agenda. Recuerden que pueden interactuar con nosotros utilizando la línea para mensajes de WhatsApp. Aparece en pantalla 6544-1033. La siguiente conferencia también será dictada en inglés. Disponemos de traducción simultánea y si alguno de ustedes requiere del receptor o dispositivo, en la parte de atrás lo puede retirar. El siguiente tema, las mejores prácticas en manejo y cambio de tripulación a nivel mundial. Nos acompaña el capitán Deepak Kukreti, en representación de Maersk. Lo recibimos con un fuerte aplauso.
Very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being part of this very important discussion. Before I get started, I think I would like to ask you for a little favor. If you could, maybe for the next 20 seconds, close your eyes and go back to the time when you were in lockdown in your homes due to the COVID pandemic. So it will be something like a bit of a hypnosis session. I'll take you through it. But if we may begin, give me 20 seconds. Let's close our eyes and go back to the time when we were in a lockdown. You will remember that you were confined to your homes with your family members and your pets. Much restricted to go even to the neighborhood grocery store to buy essential items, even to take your dog for a walk. You were longing to meet your friends, family, and relatives. You were longing to go to your favorite restaurant, to a park, to cinema. But the threat was real, and it was very alarming. COVID pandemic was unprecedented, and it was bringing death and destruction in its wake. Many of us suffered with the family members actually infected, or we learned about friends and relatives who were caught up with this deadly disease. Well, you may open your eyes now. I reckon that it's a painful memory, and I really thank you for playing along. Thank you very much. I just want you to hold on to this thought for a second longer, because this sensation of confinement, of being isolated. What if I tell you that this is normal at sea? This is the life at sea. The seafarers live in a confined space that we call a ship. They work, they eat, they sleep, very much like it was for you guys in remote working from home during the COVID pandemic. But the only difference is that they're thousands of miles away from their family, their loved ones, their friends, and even their pets. So it's extremely challenging, and I cannot think of any other industry that demands so much from its professionals that shipping does. But the good thing is that seafarers inherently are very brave. They accept this life at sea. In fact, they embrace it, and they take pride in this life at sea. We all know that the scars of COVID are still very fresh in our memory. Millions of people were impacted across the world. As per official numbers, we know that more than 700 people got infected, more than 7 million people lost their lives. It was a tragedy, if to sum it. And honestly, everything came to a standstill. The world came to a standstill. Commercial flights were suspended. Airline industry was impacted. Production facilities were impacted. Industries closed down their doors. But global shipping continued 24/7. This is quite remarkable, and we sometimes fail to acknowledge what shipping was doing throughout the pandemic and what our seafarers were doing throughout the pandemic. And I think they proved throughout the time that they were essential workers. They played a very, very crucial role in making sure that the supplies, the medicines, the equipments were reaching where they were most needed. And I should know because I was there. I was in command of a ship. I was on board. In fact, the gentleman in the picture is me. It was not easy. It was physically, mentally, emotionally very exhausting. To be in the COVID suit day in and day out, making sure that myself, the crew, the whole team, the pilots, the stevedores, we were all safe and we were all protected and we were carrying out the business of maritime transport. Making sure more than ever that the economy was ticking, that essential commodities were reaching the supermarket shelves, that medicines, equipment, vaccines were reaching where they were most needed. As the virus spread, countries, states started shutting down. We all started going into a lockdown, and we all suffered through that. It was painful. But for seafarers, it was even worse because they literally got trapped. They got trapped on the ships where they worked for months on end beyond their normal tour of duty. Shipping companies scrambled to make crew changes. And the difficulty was that many countries and states were imposing lockdowns based on their ground reality as a precautionary measure, or even as based on their resources, because maybe they were running out of hospital beds or they did not have enough medication and hospital staff. And it was quite understandable, but seafarers were at the receiving end of this. Shipping companies scrambled, and it was extremely challenging. I would say it was a mammoth challenge. Worldwide, more than 500,000 seafarers were impacted. International Chamber of Shipping, in their report in July 2020, actually mentioned that this was one of the single greatest operational challenge that the shipping industry faced after World War II. 150,000 seafarers needed immediate repatriation sometime in August 2020. And it was extremely difficult. We at Maersk, we employ close to 12,500 seafarers from more than 31 countries. Normally, we would do 250 crew changes a week. During the pandemic, in the early stages in June, we had 2,600 crew members who were on board beyond their normal tour of duty. They were overdue to be relieved. Overall, throughout the pandemic, we had 54% of our crew which were delayed to be relieved. And we acknowledge the sacrifice they've made, and I think we all should. And we must all remember that throughout this pandemic, the 2 years that we went through, there was zero access to medical facilities for these crew members. I've heard of cases where captain had to pull out the teeth. We are trained, given some training in advanced medical care, but I don't remember being trained in odontology and tooth removal. So you can imagine how painful the whole experience must have been for the crew at every level. Homecoming of seafarers became quite a challenge. And international organizations, the IMO, the International Trade Organization, World Health Organization, International Chamber of Shipping, International Labour Organization, they all stepped in. IMO came up with a framework protocol for safe crew change in transit, but it was extremely difficult to implement. Maersk set up a task force early on, but as I mentioned, every country had a very different interpretation and their own scare of the spread and contamination. So it became extremely difficult to work through the nitty-gritties of a crew change, and more importantly, commercial shipping was working, but commercial airlines had stopped operating, which means that we had no access to international flights. Maersk very quickly started engaging and chartering flights. Thankfully, we managed to team up with companies like KLM, and we managed chartered flights to move our crew members. Citing some examples, we had some chartered flights from Mumbai and Manila to Egypt, Copenhagen, and Nigeria. That was quite crucial. But importantly, I think we must all acknowledge here that one of the first crew changes, which was of significance, happened right here in Panama. That was on the Rhine-Maersk, where we had, through the collaboration of the Panama Maritime Authority, the Immigration Office, the Tocumen International Airport, the KLM, and everybody else who was involved, we managed to pull a successful crew change of 6 crew members on a chartered flight, and you can see here on this slide. I apologize, my slides have a lot of pictures, but there were so many emotions which we all experienced that I could not think of a better way of expressing what the sentiment on board from our crew members, but through the pictures. And it's a testament of what we went through, and I think every crew change was a victory, which we acknowledged. Having lived through the COVID crisis, we all kind of assumed that we are now heading towards normalization. Things are going to get normal, and maybe we'll take some learnings, and things are going to get better. It has been a little disappointing, I must confess, because while some countries, they really reflected and they really improved, some countries, I would say, we still face challenges. I would like to call it as areas of opportunity. Panama is included in that, but I'll cite a few challenges or these areas of opportunities, and then I'll compare it to some of my suggestions that I present here to you. For Maersk, caring for our people is our core value. And it is a strategic priority, and it's also, as per international regulations, as per MLC, the crew member has the right to efficient transit. He has the right to safe repatriation. He has the right to medical access. He has the right to shore leave. And we need to focus on this. All separate entities, we need to come together and address this. What we are currently seeing is that sometimes we have some layers of bureaucracy which adds complexity. If I may cite, Panama is one of the places where for the visa application for a crew member to fly into Panama, along with the visa application form, passport, guarantee letter, seaman book, we also have to present the certificate of competency of each crew member, and that certificate of competency is validated by the issuing authority. And that can become a challenge. Just imagine we are going through a war in Ukraine and Russia, and we employ 600 crew members from Ukraine and Russia. They've been forced to move out of their countries. They're living in neighboring countries. Their maritime authorities, organizations are not able to process all this. So there are very real challenges. And we must also acknowledge that these certificate of competencies are actually issued as per international regulations, and they are very heavily scrutinized. I cannot think of a shipping company, a renowned shipping company, or a ship manager employing seafarers without legal, valid, approved documents. And there are post-state control inspections, so the vessel runs the risk of being detained, its operation being affected, its brand image being affected. So I think that's an opportunity for us to reflect how important is this validation for us just to issue a visa. And we must acknowledge that it kind of slows down the process. So if we can standardize a process and align it closer to what we have internationally, I think we have a great opportunity to reduce the time, make it more efficient and more transparent for everybody involved, which is obviously the immigration office, but also the crewing agencies, the local agencies, shipping lines, and everybody. Another, in line with the same topic of efficiency and simplification, I think we can use technology. Technology in Panama, I think we must all acknowledge that with the online visa, that's a great step forward. It brings efficiency, but I do believe that there's still a long road ahead. And I will show you in the next slides that Panama is responsible for a significant number of crew changes, but probably not as efficient as some of the other strategic locations. And that's something which we can probably reflect upon. And then there are certain other procedures that we have in place. For example, there are some restricted nationalities, and a lot of seafarers actually come from those places, and they're subject to custodianship. Now, let me explain that to people who don't understand what this is from a seafarer's point of view. The first aspect, let's say, for the visa issuance process, if we are doing this document validation, that even if we have on paper 48 hours, it can take longer. Sometimes we don't work over the weekends, which means that if there are visa applications which are coming over the weekend, they will only be processed during the next weekday. If there is a huge volume, then the time obviously will change. So now think from the point of view of a crew member. He's been told he's joining a ship on date X. The shipping company is preparing his flight, arranging all the logistics. But then they're told that visa is not ready. So that 24, 48-hour timeline is now shifting. And he's sitting with his bags packed, anxious to join the ship, going to take a long flight, doesn't know when he's going to join. Finally, the visa arrives. Online visa, he receives it, he flies into Panama, he reaches the airport, there is a separate queue for him. Now he feels that there is a special facility being offered to him. So he goes into this queue, he walks down, goes across, only to be detained. Why? Because he's now waiting for the custodian to accompany him to the hotel, which the company has arranged so that, taking care of his fatigue, so that once he arrives on board, he's fresh, he's recovered after a long flight, jet lag. And that's super important also from a safety aspect, because there is a strong impetus on reducing maritime accidents and pollution incidents. So this crew member who thought at the airport, once he arrived, that, okay, the visa took longer, but I'm being well received. I had a special line for me. And now he's sitting at the airport waiting for the custodian to arrive. It sometimes takes a few hours because I imagine that there are only X number of custodians, and sometimes the volume of crew change in Panama can be quite high. This crew member is now taken to the hotel and told that you cannot leave the hotel premises. The custodian will be waiting at the lobby, shadowing him. I think it's very difficult to sell it as a privilege. I think it's very difficult to sell it as a facility. I think it gives a very strong impression that they are being seen as a suspect, to put it mildly. And then they're, of course, escorted to the vessel. Now, this happens with the on-signing crew, but of late it's also happening with the off-signing crew, who's a legitimate seafarer. And let's not forget that seafarers are the most controlled travelers in the world. On a tourist visa, you'll probably enter Panama or any other country just on your passport, but seafarers are the only travelers who are carrying a passport, a seaman book, of course, the certificate of competency, a guarantee letter. It's already informed that there's a vessel scheduled to arrive. His name has got a ship of a name attached to it. So how much more control do we need, especially for seafarers, in that sense? And then it comes down to the next and very, very important aspect. It's the right of a seafarer, and in fact, it's super important for his health and his mental well-being that he's allowed shore leave. While there are many countries which are encouraging, in fact, they're imposing that we go, the shipping companies must ensure that their crew members have a fair chance to go ashore. There are some countries, and Panama, unfortunately, is one of them, where we have a very complex process to allow this. And MLC, the Maritime Labour Convention, actually states that we should not have any cost involved, while we actually see a very significant cost involved to this crew movement. There has to be pre-approval 24 to 48 hours before. The captain has to send a list of people who can go ashore. The shore passes are issued. It has a cost attached. And then once the ship arrives, the shore pass has to be stamped at the immigration office close to the terminal, and the local agent has to be present. And then there is a cost involved to go to this place, and then there is a cost involved to transport this crew member. So I don't think it helps anyone when it comes to mental well-being. And I think that as an industry or as a whole, we all acknowledge that mental well-being has become a very, very serious concern, including for the seafarers. There's a spike in suicides, there's a spike in mental health issues, and I think it's a very growing concern which we should all acknowledge. A quick comparison then with some of the other strategic locations, and I think I put a very simple slide up here, but I think it's very important for us to, let's say, draw a comparison between Singapore, which is an international hub, and Panama. You will see in 2022, Maersk had the crew changes which are very similar to some of these locations, Singapore, for instance, which shows that Panama is a very important crew change destination for us. It's a very attractive location, and there is an opportunity for us to do even better and surpass these numbers. I've drawn a slight comparison here also for the time to acquire for a visa. The visa process is super simple in places like Singapore, where a letter is issued. All the crew member has to do is travel with this letter. He goes to the airport, from the origin airport, of course, with this letter, flies into Singapore, access to the vessel. Korea, 48 hours, Malaysia, 48 to 72 hours, Panama, I imagine that it's close to 48 hours, but due to the different things that I mentioned, that it could be a weekend, the volume and COC validation, the certificate of competency validation, it could actually move up to 7 days. So it becomes extremely difficult for the crewing managers to then arrange flights and perform the crew logistics. And I think that's an important theme that we're discussing here. The document required, again, I've kind of compared, but you will see here that for Singapore, this immigration letter and the seaman discharge book is all he needs, which he's carrying on his person. Guarantee letter for Korea, guarantee letter for Malaysia, but certificate of competency validation. In Panama, shore leave, I think I've touched upon this, but you will see that in Singapore, Korea, Malaysia, the vessel arrives, they get access to go ashore, and crew members need to go ashore sometimes just to take a walk around the block, just to get some essential commodities for their day-to-day because they live on a ship. So sometimes it's just a toothbrush that he wants to go outside and buy, or just buy a souvenir from the country or the city that he is visiting so he can take it back to his friends and family. So I think there is an opportunity for us to work together. I think there is an opportunity for us to reflect and see how we can come together and make this change. I think with all the discussions we've had this morning today, it's very encouraging. I personally feel we are at the cusp of a change, a transformation, if I may call it, rainbow at the end of a storm. But we must also be mindful that COVID was one of the challenges that we faced. We are still faced with challenges like Ukraine and Russia war, which is impacting our seafarers, the Turkey earthquake, and so many others. If we collaborate, I do see a road forward for us, and it's an opportunity for us to create that roadmap which is sustainable and remind ourselves that crew deserves our recognition. The crew deserves efficient. We can always make things safe, secure, and yet efficient. And I think that's an important point I want to make here. And make it dignified for any professional. Seafarers deserve that recognition. I think seafarers deserve that empathy in our actions. And I think our colleagues in AP Moller Maersk, Buenaventura, Colombia, have summed it quite nicely. I love this picture. And I think it's time for us to do the same. Thank you very much. And in the end, a shout out to all the women who organized this great event in this room, in this industry. We are inspired by your confidence, your determination, your hard work, and your resilience. You truly inspire us. Thank you very much. Our salutations. Thank you.
Continuamos con el tema manejo y cambio de tripulación. Nos acompaña ahora Alan Ortiz, él es jefe de la Unidad Marítima del Servicio Nacional de Migración.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes a todos. Primero que todo, feliz Día de la Mujer a todas las damas presentes. En representación de la señora directora Samira Gozaine, tengo el agrado pues, de exponerles el punto de la parte de la seguridad migratoria en Panamá que hemos hecho para el cambio de tripulación durante COVID y ahora pues después de que ya hemos pasado esta tragedia. Para nosotros es muy importante mostrar esta estadística, la cual no se ha hecho sola, es un trabajo en equipo, como bien dijo el capitán Deepak, un trabajo en equipo de gobierno, de empresa privada, y que se demostró durante esta pandemia para que este número que presento aquí desde el 2018 aumente hasta hoy en día en el 2023, que es el cambio de tripulación, embarques y desembarques. En esta gráfica es muy interesante y la traje a colación porque en el año 2018 nosotros pues teníamos un total de embarques de marinos de 18,000 personas, ¿no? Sin embargo, aumentamos en el 2020 y es evidente que en el 2019 y es evidente que en el 2020 inicia la pandemia y Panamá y todos los estamentos de seguridad, todo el gobierno y todas las empresas privadas enfrentan esta tragedia para darle pues, a Panamá buscar de esta tragedia una oportunidad que se ve reflejada en el año 2021, cuando todavía estábamos afrontando esta tragedia del COVID. Panamá duplica el embarque de tripulantes con 34.876 y en el 2022 aumenta con 38.700. ¿Qué quería demostrar? Que igualmente el cambio de tripulación en ambas vías siempre ha ido en aumento. Nosotros, pues desde que llegamos aquí, tratamos de simplemente no cambiar las reglas del juego, manejarnos bajo los mismos marcos legales existentes, sencillos, los mismos requisitos para las solicitudes de visa, y simplemente estamos ahora enfrentando un nuevo cambio, pero un nuevo cambio que, aparte del negocio marítimo, nosotros como estamento de seguridad, es importante y primario la migración migratoria. A diferencia de otros países, Panamá cuenta con el Canal de Panamá. Prioridad número 1 de todos los panameños, protegerlo. Esta gráfica, por último, que presenté, es cómo se vio el año 2022 en embarques y desembarques en un periodo corto de un mes al inicio del año. Enero y febrero 2022, 5.900, ¿verdad? Y actualmente 6.500, lo que quiere decir que realmente hay algo que estamos haciendo bien. La siguiente gráfica quise mostrarle los casos que esta vez me compete de este lado de la seguridad, porque también soy gente de mar, también soy tripulante, también soy egresado de una escuela náutica, también he viajado a bordo de los buques y he estado en ese pequeño confinamiento que todos los marinos amamos, pero desde el lado de la perspectiva de la seguridad, siempre hay amenazas. Y estas amenazas, pues se las traigo aquí a colación en un rango pequeño, simplemente de un año. Dentro de los controles previos establecidos, también hicimos controles posteriores, todas indicadas por una orden ministerial por diferentes casos que se sospechaban, pues necesitaban atención primaria. Dentro de estos controles previos, nosotros hemos podido detectar en menos de un año documentación fraudulenta en 20 casos. Hemos impedido bajar a marinos que tienen órdenes internacionales a nuestro país, más de 10 casos, y que para nosotros como panameños representa una amenaza. Los controles posteriores al embarque del marino o a la llegada del marino a tierra ha dado mucho mejor resultado en el tema de seguridad del esperado. Con él hemos encontrado alteraciones, documentos totalmente alterados de visa de marinos. 7. Hemos encontrado marinos que han entrado a la República de Panamá evadiendo los puestos de control migratorios, más de 25. Alteración de documentación del buque. Es increíble pensar, pero sí lo hacen. Inclusive, pues, alteran todo lo que son los manifiestos para la presentación de los requisitos de los controles previos. Y, pues, una falsificación de firma de visa de marino. Abajo y no menos importante, quise traer a colación los casos de alto perfil. Un caso de alto perfil o de alerta máxima son las deserciones. Y quiero que retomemos lo que al inicio les comenté. La importancia para nosotros en la seguridad marítima, en el Servicio Nacional de Migración, compete a que para nosotros toda persona que llega a la República de Panamá pasa por este perfilamiento a través de nuestro sistema y nosotros podemos también detectar si representa una amenaza o no. Nosotros tuvimos en un periodo de un año 6 deserciones de nacionales de Cuba, una deserción de Pakistán, Bangladesh 2, Nepal 7, Siria 2, India 1. Con esto se toma la decisión de reforzar la seguridad migratoria nacional. Por orden del señor ministro, se nos sugiere un plan para atender esta necesidad que pueden ser tratadas y que son tratadas como amenaza a nuestro canal, lo cual todos conocemos como las custodias de marino. Alerta de máxima seguridad y altos perfiles. En estas alertas de máximos perfiles, tengo que comentarles que son específicamente alertas de lo que hoy hemos traído y hemos trabajado con esfuerzo la atención de la temporada 2022-2023 de cruceros. Con orgullo podemos decir que hemos impedido el desembarco de más de 15 personas de muy alto perfil que anteriormente, sin estos controles previos, bajaban a Panamá, muy probablemente podían hacer más de 4 cosas y luego retornaban a sus cruceros y regresaban a sus países de origen. Con esto, pues nosotros alimentamos la seguridad migratoria y lo demostramos pues con estos números que hoy les traje. En la temporada actual tenemos 15 de estas altas alertas. A continuación, y muy importante para todos, nosotros queríamos compartir el parte semanal de las atenciones que hemos realizado. Esto es nuevamente un trabajo en equipo y realmente nos impresionan los números, nos impresiona saber que todos los pasajeros y tripulantes que abordan realmente se llevan una muy buena impresión desde que llegan a Panamá, desde que pasan por el Servicio Nacional de Migración, con un sistema que si hemos participado de estos eventos de cruceros sabemos que no tardamos más de 6 segundos por tripulante, que es muy probable que teníamos muchas dudas sobre el establecimiento de estas nuevas normas, pero hoy en día es una realidad de nosotros podemos levantar la mano y decir que Norwegian Cruise Line nos felicita por tener a su disposición cada vez que vienen 30 inspectores migratorios y que la atención de 2.500 personas se da en menos de 1 hora y 25 minutos, a diferencia de otros grandes puertos que posiblemente tengan mucho más experiencia que nosotros en el trato de pasajeros y tripulantes. Lo demás son gráficos de las visas de marino en este corto periodo que nosotros hacemos a diario y los demás trámites administrativos. Quería cerrar mi pequeña charla y exposición con el proyecto que nosotros llamamos nuestro proyecto insignia, que es un proyecto de la visa de marino, un proyecto que ya, si Dios nos los permite y el esfuerzo del equipo de migración, equipo de informática, lo podemos sacar, va a ser una realidad. Algo que no teníamos en Panamá, lo vamos a lograr el 15 de abril. Vamos a tener una visa en la cual el costo es el mismo. ¿Y cuál es el impacto de esta visa electrónica? Es una visa que nos va a representar mucho menos error humano, pérdida de papel, una visa más segura, una visa que una vez emitida le llegue al marino a su correo electrónico, que pueda viajar con él con su móvil y su dispositivo, o si bien quiere sacarle una copia. Esta inversión de tiempo de repente pudo haber tardado un poco, tenemos que confesarlo. Sin embargo, hemos hecho todos los esfuerzos para que esta visa de marino sea realidad el próximo 15 de abril. Esta visa de marinos va a traer como consecuencia, sabemos que va a reducir los costos operativos de las agencias navieras, toda vez que el pago va a ser en línea, los requisitos van a ser ingresados, van a ser analizados, van a ser evaluados y una vez aprobada esta visa estará en manos del solicitante, sin necesidad de mandar a un conductor, sin necesidad de tener que mandar a un representante a pagar una visa. La idea de nosotros, que no lo traje aquí a colación, y siguiendo la idea del capitán Deepak, más allá de esta visa, es poder ampliar y darle la dignidad que merecemos la gente de mar. Realmente creo que es una primicia lo que voy a decir, pero nosotros estamos encaminados en un sistema integral, menos burocrático y tratar de eliminar el contacto humano con humano y que un pasajero de un buque, un tripulante, pueda tener la facilidad de utilizar lo que todos conocemos en el Aeropuerto Nacional de Tocumen o cualquier aeropuerto internacional en Panamá como el Fast Pass. Un tripulante que viene en avión, un tripulante que llega de su país de destino, un tripulante que solamente presenta su pasaporte ante una máquina y se dirige pues a su destino final, que es el barco. Esta ha sido pues mi pequeña presentación en temas de migración. La seguridad migratoria para todos es muy importante como país, recordándonos que sí tenemos algo muy valioso en nuestros hombros como panameños y que debemos proteger, el Canal de Panamá. La seguridad migratoria es importante. Agradezco a todos su atención, a todas las damas, feliz día y muchas gracias.
Y antes de cambiar el formato para el panel, nos acompaña el capitán Orlando Alar, él es consultor y docente, quien hará la introducción del debate.
Good afternoon. Well, first of all, our respects and congratulations to all women on International Women's Day, and particularly the organizing committee, which is mostly women. Congratulations today and always. I was told that this panel discussion would attract a lot of attention. I would generate a lot of interest, and I can see by the audience and the amount of people here at this time that that is true. And as we have seen with the previous presentations, this is going to be a very lively discussion. And I want to thank Deepak Kukredi from Maersk. I want to thank Francis Simets, Panama Agency Services, who will be with us in a minute, and Alan Ortiz, Servicio Marítimo Nacional de Migración, for their presentations. And with this, what I would like to do is just very briefly, if I can find a way, wrong. Oh, okay. The biggest one in green, I should have known. Just a few remarks just to set the stage for the panel discussion. I have to say that we've been discussing this issue of crew exchange since the mid-90s, when in the Panama Canal we began looking at the possibilities for business after the transition of the Panama Canal. So it's a subject that we've been discussing for many, many years. And luckily, I can see from the Immigration Department's presentation that we have moved forward and we've come to a very good position. As Deepak mentioned, this is a very operational, a very humanitarian, a very social and economic activity. And we have to remember also that at the forefront of all these activities are the seafarers. And I think it has been expressed very well by Deepak and also immigration that we have to remember seafarers. We have to remember also that they are critical to the sustainability of the industry. We have seen in the last few years, the last few months, that there is a huge deficit of seafarers all over the world. And that puts the industry in danger. And if we don't do something about crew changes and make it flexible and as efficient as possible, as they have demonstrated, then we're going to have a problem. And of course, Deepak also mentioned the negative impact of COVID, and he also mentioned the role that Panama played in making this a lot easier for seafarers all over the world. And I think the statistics are there as far as what Panama did to make it easier for seafarers and shipping companies all over the world. And I think we can't forget this when there was a time when this is what we had to go through also during the pandemic. And we cannot forget this either, the economic downturn and the ships laid up, loss of jobs, and the economic and financial situations that we had that also had an impact on seafarers all over the world. Security, financial issues, as they have mentioned, and as immigration mentioned, security is a big issue for Panama, particularly with the Panama Canal. Crew exchange, as both Deepak and Alan mentioned, is a strategic activity for the industry, but also for Panama. And as I said before, we have been talking about this activity and how particular it is to Panama due to the strategic position of our country. And it goes hand in hand with crew exchange. With more than 15,000 ships going through the Panama Canal every year, and the air availability, the hub that we have for air transportation, of course, it just makes sense that crew exchange would be an activity that we can take advantage of in Panama. And as Deepak mentioned, there are best practices that we can follow, and I'm sure we have been doing that, and we can continue to do so. We have big ports all over the world. We have Singapore, we have Rotterdam, we have Antwerp, conducting crew exchange in a very efficient, very effective way, and there's no reason why we cannot take advantage of that experience and implement it in Panama, as I'm sure we're doing based on what Alan from Immigration mentioned. And with this, I would like to call then Deepak Kukredi from Maersk. I would like to call Francis Simons, Panama Agency Services, and Alan Ortiz, Servicio Nacional de Migración, to come to the podium, and then we start the panel, and we accept questions. I have a couple of questions already, but we accept your questions. Please help me welcome them.
Mientras preparamos el formato, les recordamos nuestra línea para las preguntas, las consultas y comentarios. Ahí está en pantalla, 6544-1033. Y recuerden que también contamos con el sistema de traducción simultánea. Ya estamos listos, entonces queda con ustedes el capitán Orlando Allard para la moderación de este panel.
As I said, I already have a couple of questions here that I received on my mobile. The first one is for Francis, and I think I'll ask you the first question since you haven't had a chance to make a presentation. What would you say are your biggest challenges as an agency regarding crew exchange, of course?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank the Cámara Marítima for giving me the opportunity to be here today, and happy Women's Day to all the women out there. One of the main difficulties that we've been having here in Panama for crew changes has been the delay in the issuance of the seaman visa. You know, it's a case where we apply for it in the morning, we get a confirmation if it's been approved or rejected in the afternoon. If it's been rejected, we have to send it again. We might have to wait until the following day until it's approved. And all this just adds on to the stress. The principal is pushing for the visa. The people have to start moving, but they don't want to move until the visa is available. And I feel that that is one of our top issues right now that is generating a lot of delays and crew changes that cannot be performed because of the time constraint to obtain the visa.
A follow-up question. Will the electronic visa help?
I sincerely hope the electronic visa will help. I have not tested the system. Just this morning we received the email asking for our credentials to have access to the system. And I really just hope that the new system, if we get a visa rejected, all we have to do is do the correction and not have to fill out the entire information again. Because when we're doing bulk movement of crew changes, and there's just this one little issue that was not in order, we have to input manually all that information again. Something that was already inputted in the system, we have to do it again. And I just sincerely hope that the new system allows us to make corrections with the information that we've already digitalized into the system without having to do it again. I am also very confident that the new system will help us a lot at the airport, because right now the movement of the physical visa from the agency office to the immigration desk goes through a lot of hands, takes a lot of times. Many times the crew member arrives and the visa has not arrived to the immigration desk. I feel that this electronic visa will help us solve that issue. And we're looking the new system with very good eyes, and hopefully it'll help us in other issues.
Thank you. Deepak, you want to comment on that?
I think Francis has touched on this topic quite well, but just a point to add here would be, for any logistics company, I'm sure everybody will agree that predictability and reliability is crucial. So crew logistics is not very different in that sense. And though I'm really hopeful that electronic visa will help, but if we can simplify the process and make it more transparent, improve that visibility as to where we are, when you, on your app, when you order a pizza and you're actually seeing where it is, it kind of helps you plan ahead. And I think that is essential for a supply chain industry, for crew logistics as well. So if it brings more transparency, even if we know that it's 3 days, we can work around that. Because remember that we are dealing with a lot of moving parts. The crew member is in another part of the world. He needs to be flown in. He needs to have the right documents. It has to be safe and secure for the receiving country, Panama, and he has to connect with the ship. That's the final objective. So if the ship is not, if he's not going to make it to the ship, then we've lost the battle. So I think that becomes super critical, that we work diligently towards making it more predictable and more reliable. And I believe that with modern technology, we have the ability to achieve that. And with what Alan shared with us, I think the future is bright if we can implement it.
Okay. Thank you, Deepak. Alan, I have a couple of questions. Number one, it's really not a question, but a comment. I think it was a big surprise that you showed us statistics today. That made a lot of people very happy, and I thank you for that, because I received quite a few comments regarding the lack of statistics, and I think we've seen them all, and I thank you for that. I think it's a big help for the whole industry to find out exactly where we are and where we're heading. And in that respect, my question would be, are you getting all the help you need? Are you getting all the tools you need to do the job as well as you have been doing it? What else? Yes. What do you want?
Yes, actually, it's a challenge every day for us because we are working 24/7 actually, but we are working, looking always forward, because every day for us, it's a different day. Every day we have more visas to be checked. So what we are doing now is receiving 300 applicants on our systems, and we are giving them answer in 8 hours. I can tell you right now, if I can make a zoom to my office, I will show you my computer, which is zero. From 7 o'clock in the morning to 1500, we work non-stop. What we are looking forward is to make it longer, this work time, till maybe 2300. But now we are still waiting for a new office, a big office, to recruit more officers to train them, because as the name says, it says Siemens visa. And for us, it's a requirement to know that this COC or Siemens book is valid and authentic. Because we are giving a visa to any crew member, which is saying that he's a seafarer, but you will be surprised how many fake applicants we have received last year. Many that for us is like when we receive those types of visas requirement, actually myself as a seafarer, I said, okay, this is very sad. How can you think that you can enter to one country without being checked as your application said? If you want to go as a tourist, you have to say what you are going to do, where are you going to do. That's our job every day. Actually, we have received all working tools. The only thing which is missing is a big office. We expect to be on May or June this year, but parallel of that, we are working to make every process automatic process. No more manual, no more papers. We want to give an efficient service, and we are all involved in that. My team I can talk up from the main director, Samira Gosaine, and till my officers in the office, they are all involved to be more efficient, to be, because as you saw in the graphic, it looks to be more and more and more aggressive, more than what is look aggressive. That means that something Panama is doing good and is doing well. So as immigration services, we cannot let to get behind of the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Francis, you saw the chart that Deepak presented. Is a comparison on best practices on different ports. Do you want to comment on that, on best practices?
Well, first of all, I saw the statistics that immigration gave us. It's the first time I see these statistics, and I'm very happy to see them because it sets grounds, to see the work that we're doing and the reasons for the delays that we've been having. But I still feel that we have a lot of room to improve. Even though Panama is growing as an option for doing crew change, I feel we still have room to improve on the services provided to the seafarers. And I understand that it takes 8 hours for the visa to be approved. I feel that we can still improve that. We have room for improvement. And help our crew members get on their way to Panama as soon as possible. Other than that, with the custodians, I do feel it is a little bit of frustrating for the crew members. We've had seamen with U.S. visa and U.K. visa being required to have a escort, and I feel it's completely unnecessary. These crew members are here to work. They need their rest, walk around, take their breath, help out our economy a little bit by buying some souvenirs or something. And I also feel that, for example, for the sign-off crew, we can reevaluate the necessity of having a custodian for crew members signing off. Because there's a vessel behind it, there's a shipping agency behind it, a ship owner, crew managers. There's a whole bunch of people behind this crew change giving support that in case the unfortunate or what nobody wants happening, that the crew member deserts, you know, it's not something that we planned for, you know, and we don't want that happening. We do everything possible in our hands to avoid those situations. That's not our business, you know. And just because we've had, you know, a few cases of crew members that have deserted, it doesn't mean that all other seafarers have to pay for the few crew members that misused the system.
We have two questions from the audience. The first one is for Mr. Deepak. In your vast experience, have you ever managed to deal with cases of seafarers running away, getting lost, and or avoiding the controls from national or regional authorities? How frequently can we expect such situations to become a reality?
Well, thank you for the question, and it kind of ties to some comments which Alan made and also you, Francis. So, first and foremost, I've spent 20 years at sea, and I have never come across a situation where a crew member deserted the vessel. However, I have heard about these instances. Like Francis said, it does happen, it may happen, but the numbers are relatively low. If I may say, and Alan is quite right, we are really thankful that he showed all these statistics and all the risk and evaluations that are necessary for safety and security of the country. But I would just like to emphasize, one, that one size does not fit all. I think with the technology and data that is available to you, I hope it is easier for us to flag the bad players and not make everybody, my focus is here on seafarers, to pay the price for this, because it becomes extremely taxing physically, mentally, emotionally, and to their self-respect when they are held up at airports under detention, custodian, and all that we've discussed earlier. The second thing, I think, is when it comes to documentation. I do understand that there might be cases of fraudulent documentation, but again, I would like to emphasize that shipping today, and we've got our regulators sitting right here with us. We've got Antonio from DNV, which I know, and Arsenio is here from IMO. I'm sure they will be able to acknowledge that it's an extremely controlled environment. I cannot think of a shipping line which is hiring people with fraudulent documents, because it's not coming into a country is just one aspect of it. He has to sail on the ship, he has to serve in his function, and he is subject to port state control inspection, he is subject to flag state inspections. It's literally impossible for us to do that. It's an extremely dangerous situation for a vessel's operation and its brand image also for a ship, any ship owner or shipping line. I do acknowledge that there can be some back alley players who do this. There might be a possibility that visas can be, but that's an entirely different network or racket, which I believe is outside the shipping. There are probably people who will try to misuse to enter the country using the seaman visa, which we all want to protect, yourself and myself. And we have to flag these people, but I do not believe that these are genuine seafarers, because genuine seafarers and genuine shipping companies will not have that. I hope it answers.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. And the next question is for Alan, and I guess it refers also to your chart where you presented best practices in other ports. And the question is that, teniendo en cuenta el comparativo que no deja bien posicionado a Panamá en cuanto a competitividad, haciendo referencia al tema migratorio localmente, ¿cuál sería el compromiso o los planes de mejora por parte del Servicio de Migración de mantenernos como un destino viable y competitivo?
Sí, excelente pregunta. Para nosotros, desde el inicio, por eso traje las estadísticas a colación, es muy importante ver estadísticas para proyectarnos hacia dónde vamos. Nosotros tenemos el compromiso de poner todos nuestros sistemas de manera automática para ser mucho más competitivos. Pero en el marco de la competitividad no podemos olvidar la seguridad, que es lo que le compete al Servicio Nacional de Migración y a todos los estamentos en Estados Unidos, CBP, aquí en Panamá, Servicio Nacional de Migración, en cuanto a la seguridad migratoria. No conozco, o en mis pocos años como gente de mar, no conozco un aeropuerto o un control migratorio en puerto en donde no tuve que identificarme, como bien lo dijo el capitán Deepak, y tuve que presentar mi identificación como marino. Aplicaciones de visa que tardaban 3 meses, por ejemplo, en mis tiempos cuando navegaba para Brasil, Panamá te las da en 8 horas. Cierto es, hay casos excepcionales que requieren, y nuestros sistemas nos indican que hay que perfilar un poco más, y por eso algunas demoras en los casos más mínimos. Pero todavía no conozco un país que me dé una visa en 8 horas. Panamá lo hace. Y acepto el reto de poderlo brindar en 4 horas, en 3 horas. Todo esto conlleva mucha organización, mucho trabajo en equipo. Nosotros dependemos de que la información que nos llega a nuestro sistema esté bien escrita. La persona que está detrás de la pantalla de la agencia naviera, de nuestro usuario, haya colocado la documentación necesaria. Eso también retrasa lo que es el análisis de una visa. Nosotros vamos y nos comprometemos, es compromiso más que institucional de gobierno, la digitalización, la mejora de los procesos y, por supuesto, las mejores prácticas.
Thank you, Alan. Oh, we have more questions. The next question is for either one of you. Why is a custodian necessary? And I think you've kind of answered that question already. If the percentage of desertion is low compared to the total of monthly or yearly crew exchange, operations and crew disembarkation, can custodians be eliminated from the formula?
Okay. Why is a custodian necessary? The custodian exists, not now, exists since, I cannot remember because I have been working here since 2020, but before that, we have custodians in immigration services. Due to small cases, but very specific cases that a specialist did a very good work searching those persons, the government, within the Minister of Security, decide to make an improvement of this custody instead of eliminate it, because for Panamanians it represents a danger to our Panama Canal. And that's why we still keep in. I can give the message after I heard all the good opinions, decisions to our directors in order to give them the news, in order to give them your message directly as a seafarer, now as a security member, but more as a seafarer. And I will do it. I compromise to do it. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And thank you all as well. One more thing that I would like to say. Alan, you've mentioned teamwork all along. And on behalf of the Maritime Chamber, I think I would like to say, and the President is here, that please consider the rest of the shipping lines, the shipping agencies, also as part of that team that you work with, because at the end, it's for the good of Panama, for the country of Panama.
I will do it, yes.
Thank you.
You, Captain.
Oh, my microphone is off now. If I may very quickly add to this, Alan, thank you for sharing all the statistics. And to what Captain Allard also mentioned, I think collaboration will be key. All what you presented, the future plans look very promising. The fact that the number of crew changes is increasing in Panama, I think it's a great sign for the economy, because maritime and logistics is coupled with the Panama's ambition to become an international hub. We would like to collaborate, we would like to see these changes and be available for further discussions, but we acknowledge what Autoridad Marítima Panama and Immigration Office are doing, and we acknowledge all the efforts, we acknowledge this proactive discussion, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our doors are open. I want to suggest periodic meetings where we can sit down, discuss our issues, and fine-tune to see where we can improve little by little, and keep Panama's position as a hub for crew change growing, and not only that, but with a good international image, and that make sure everybody's happy. That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fuerte el aplauso para nuestros especialistas. Vamos a hacer entrega del obsequio y reconocimiento. Nos acompaña René Gómez, Carmen Márquez, Enrique Clement, Rodrigo Hernández. Nuevamente nuestro agradecimiento a Deepak Kukreti, a Alan Ortiz, Francis Seimetz y al capitán Orlando Allard. Y de las mejores prácticas, manejo y cambio de tripulación, pasamos al tema del costo de la descarbonización. Vamos a cambiar el formato del escenario para dar paso a la siguiente conferencia. Muchísimas gracias. Gracias, capitán. Gracias a ustedes. Ya estamos listos. El siguiente tema, costo de la descarbonización. Y nos acompaña Dinesh Sharma. Él es director de Drury Maritime Advisors. Lo recibimos con un fuerte aplauso.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for inviting Drury here. Firstly, a very happy International Women's Day to all the women here and wherever they are. I saw some women walking in with very large umbrellas. I think one of the exhibitors is giving out umbrellas. Ladies, when you go back home, remember that men are only human beings. Sometimes they forget. So use those umbrellas very discretionally. Right. As an ex-seafarer, I can only second what the previous session was about. Crew change. You cannot be a global hub, a regional hub, by not having the full ecosystem, and the crew change is an important element. But anyways, that is not what I'm here to discuss. My name is Dinesh Sharma. I work for a company called Drury. We are a maritime research and advisory company. We follow the various maritime sectors very closely. Today I'm going to talk about, I won't be talking about future fuels. I won't be talking about what to do with decarbonization. My own view is decarbonization is more than just about finding the future fuel mix. The global decarbonization agenda is driving structural change. It is driving structural change in sectors it is driving structural change in industries, it is driving structural change in economies. The economies are transitioning to become more renewable, more circular, and therefore more local or regionally aligned. That is who we are and what we do, but I will not take much time on that. So I'll very quickly be talking about, I'll be taking a very high-level view, what's happened in the last 10 years with decarbonization, the switch to alternative fuels, what the shipping lines are currently doing, talk about a little bit about the regionalization of decarbonization. Regionalization of regulations and what impact that will have on shipping. And just really take a far-sighted view rather than thinking about the next 5 years, 10 years. If we take the view 2050, fully decarbonized world, what does that mean? So this is probably a graph that a lot of people are familiar with, various sources. This is not what Drewry produces. This is produced by Climate Analytics. This is produced by the IEA. One important thing, and these are all estimates, not actual figures, but one essential thing that it outlines is that in the past decade, the emissions from the shipping industry are estimated to have flatlined. These are estimates, but I believe these should be correct given the advances we have made with the engine efficiency. However, as trade continues to grow, the emissions will start to increase once again. We are very quickly approaching the end of this decade, where simply flatlining is not good enough. Emissions have to start to decline. And I think DNV made a very good point about the regulatory environment, the growing pressure on IMO. And this pressure on the IMO is not from the climate activists, but from the industry bodies themselves that outline that a couple of things. They say that the current policy measures are not sufficient to meet the targets. They say that the current targets itself by IMO are not sufficient. Of course, these are in the process of being revised. That's the regulatory side on the emissions. We then have a market environment where there are self-imposed targets. A number of companies are going further than what the regulatory environment outlines. There is almost a race to get to net zero as quickly as possible. And that makes me question, why have this race to get to net zero as soon as? In the maritime sector, to my very simple view, is a very simple sector. We carry goods from A to B. There is no great differentiation in service between a company X and a company Y. Therefore, the vast majority of the competition is on the basis of cost or on the basis of price. And decarbonization is seen as a key differentiator by companies to gain that competitive advantage and to gain market share in the long run. The ability to offer a product to the market where consumers are increasingly aware of the carbon footprint and are increasingly looking at the carbon footprint will make a key factor of choice when selecting a shipping line or the shipping line to transport their goods with. The early adopters of the decarbonization will need to commit to long-term offtake agreements for fuels. That will create a barrier for the other competitors or other competing lines. A shipping line that has access to decarbonized fuel is able to benefit not just from a lower carbon footprint and a greater market share, customer choice, but also better financing arrangements, and therefore able to compete more effectively with a company that is not able to offer a completely carbon neutral supply chain. The key takeaway from this, for me, is it is not the regulatory environment that will drive the rapid transition to decarbonized world. It is the financial incentive for the individual shipping companies that is driving the rapid decarbonization efforts. If we look at what is happening with the order book or the uptake of alternative fuels, there has been a widespread acceptance or a switch to alternate fuels. And that has pushed the LNG and methanol dual fuel tonnage to roughly about 80% of the order book for the car carriers and also for the cruise sector. So that sector has already seen a massive transition. In the container sector, you still have about 40% of the order book is of dual fuel. If you look at the tramp sectors, roughly about 90% of the current order book is still the traditional fuels, the conventional fuels, the more emitting fuels. Liner operators are rejecting fuel oils. I believe in the last month, only about 8% of the orders by capacity were for conventional fuels. There is a very large, although LNG has been quite there's been quite an uptake of LNG in the recent months. There is more recently a much bigger and stronger increase in interest in the dual order for methanol ships. So that is ramping up very quickly. The methanol dual fuel ships currently accounts for about 12% of the container ship order book by capacity, 5% of cruise ship order book by capacity, versus then perhaps nothing almost a year ago. And then there are various emerging systems, whether it is with the use of hydrogen fuel cells, battery-operated vessels, etc. There will be a distinction between the long-haul ships and the short-haul ships. The key takeaway from all of this is that the different segments of the shipping industry will move very differently. They will not be moving. They will not be moving in tandem. I suppose this is on, yeah. The liner segments, whether it is the car carriers, whether it is the containers, whether it is the cruise sectors, where there is a fixed call, a fixed route, it is more convenient or it is more conducive for them to transfer, be the first movers to transfer to a decarbonized fuel uptake. So there is a race to decarbonize. The liner sectors are more in the forefront of this, the tramp sectors lagging behind. We then have a number of nations that have made pledges to decarbonize by 2050. The European Union has gone perhaps a bit further ahead. They have put out their Fit for 55 emissions targets. What the European Union intends to do is to reduce 55% of net greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And that is not compared to the 2008 levels, that is compared to the 1990 levels. So no, that's fine. Within the shipping companies, there is a race to decarbonize. Within the regions, within the countries, there is a race to decarbonize as quickly as well. If Europe, China, and the US alone were to set stringent rules like Europe, about 84% of the global shipping emissions could be removed. The second interesting thing from the entire regulatory environment that Europe has is the fuel tax, the emissions tax. If you add all of this up, there is a greater penalty on the smaller ships, on the regional trading ships, the intra-European ships deployed on the intra-European trade. There will therefore be a move to transition to a decarbonized neutral ship, fuel neutral emissions ship on the smaller segment than on the long-haul segment. This means that there is a potential to move to greater regionalization of trades rather than the long-haul trades itself. I started off by saying decarbonization is not just about getting the fuel mix right. It is shaping sectors, industries, and economies. The economies are trending to become more renewable, more circular, more locally focused. The entire global decarbonization agenda is intended to increase access to locally produced renewable energy. That is energy from wind, sun, thermal power, hydropower, etc. There's therefore a question whether the long-haul transport in the long run will be squeezed by much higher transport cost, whether technology will reduce or narrow the inter-regional production cost differential. The cargo volumes for large vessels, especially if you think about the fossil fuels, which carry roughly about 40% of seaborne trade, they will vaporize in the next coming years. The consumer preferences will change. Although trade will continue to grow, what we expect will happen is that these trade volumes and the parcels will become much smaller. The trade will be much more intra-regional rather than long haul. The fleet profiles in the long run could be very different from what they are today. My message is one, as we think about the different fuel mix that we are getting, I think shipping in 2050 is going to be vastly different from what it is today. It is not simply a question of swapping the fuel to more cleaner fuels, but the trade, the ship sizes, the fleet profiles, etc., is going to be very different from where it is today. That's all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience and thank you for listening.
Invitamos a Michelle de la Osa, presidente del comité organizador, para hacer entrega del obsequio y reconocimiento a Dinesh Sharma, nuestro expositor que cierra el ciclo de conferencias de CAM 2023. Con un fuerte aplauso, agradecemos nuevamente la participación de Dinesh Sharma. Así finaliza este ciclo de conferencias en CAM 2023. Reiteramos nuestro agradecimiento a los patrocinadores que han hecho posible este acto. Y para cerrar la jornada, haremos un reconocimiento a mujeres del sector marítimo que se han atrevido a derribar barreras, desarrollando labores operativas que tradicionalmente eran ejecutadas por hombres. Un jurado calificador compuesto por Gisela Porras, presidenta de la Fundación Voces Vitales, Ariel San Martín y Joycelyn García, vicepresidente de Comunicaciones y Sostenibilidad de Banismo, evaluaron a 11 mujeres nominadas por empresas agremiadas a la Cámara Marítima de Panamá y adicional a su calificación se adicionó el voto realizado por el público con una ponderación del 10% del total. Queremos, con un fuerte aplauso, respaldar esta iniciativa en su primera edición. Yo me atreví. Para hacer entrega de estos reconocimientos, invitamos nuevamente a Michelle de la Osa, presidenta de CAM 2023, y a Carmen Márquez. Vamos a hacer entrega de los reconocimientos. Iniciamos con, me acompañan por favor, Carmen Márquez, y me acompaña también. Es la primera edición de esta iniciativa que distingue a mujeres del sector marítimo que se han atrevido a derribar barreras. Tercer lugar, hacen entrega de este reconocimiento Michelle de la Osa y Carmen Márquez. Paula Gutiérrez, de la empresa Talleres Industriales. Hacemos entrega de este cheque por 250 balboas. Tercer lugar, Paula Gutiérrez, de la empresa Talleres Industriales. Recibe adicional su certificado. Segundo lugar, invitamos ahora a René Gómez para hacer entrega también de este segundo lugar junto a Michelle de la Osa. Rodrigo Hernández está con nosotros. Vamos a hacer entrega del segundo lugar. Orliani Galindo, de la empresa Stewards Corporation. El segundo lugar recibe un cheque por 250 balboas y certificado. Orliani Galindo, de Stewards Corporation. Ahora invitamos a Enrique Clement, presidente de la Cámara Marítima de Panamá, para hacer entrega del primer lugar, junto a Michelle de la Osa, presidenta del comité organizador de CAM 2023. Ya estamos listos para dar a conocer el primer lugar, primera edición de Yo me atreví. Primer lugar, Yereni Lopolito.
soy Jeremy Lopolito. Decidí entrar a Serviestiva hace 7 años para darme la oportunidad de crecer en mi vida laboral y profesional. En mis labores en esta empresa he aprendido a ser un líder y a manejar el personal portuario. Actualmente soy supervisor de muelle, lo cual me siento muy orgullosa, ya que es una posición ejercida normalmente por hombres. Para mí, siendo mujer, trabajar aquí representa dedicación, esfuerzo, sacrificio y ser ejemplo para otras mujeres. Como mujer, este reto ha aportado a mi vida a ser más fuerte y una líder más centrada. Te invito a ti, mujer, a que seas parte de esta experiencia porque yo me atreví.
Primer lugar, Sher Jeremy Lopolito, de la empresa Serviestiva. Recibe, además del certificado, un cheque por 500 balboas. Y el galardón de esta primera edición de Yo Me Atreví. Queremos invitar a las 3 ganadoras al escenario para hacer el registro fotográfico. Y a las 11 postuladas, quienes ya son ganadoras por haberse atrevido. Ellas también van a recibir certificado de reconocimiento. Ahí tienen a las 3 ganadoras. Invitamos a Wendy Espinosa de Manzanillo International Terminal, Tulia Tapia de Orion Pilots, Indra Yalo de EcoClean, Walkiria Escobar de DNV, Sara García de Península Petroleum, Abigail Liu de Costco, Liesel de Jen Hart de PPC y Ana Marie Atencio de Max Marine. Ahí están las 11 mujeres postuladas, las 3 ganadoras. Ellas se atrevieron a derribar barreras, desarrollando labores operativas que tradicionalmente eran realizadas por hombres. Feliz Día Internacional de la Mujer. Enhorabuena por este reconocimiento, por el trabajo que realizan. Éxitos en el futuro. Muchas felicidades. Bueno, y antes de finalizar, les recordamos que los certificados digitales de su participación serán enviados a sus correos electrónicos. Queremos destacar y agradecer nuevamente a cada uno de los patrocinadores, socios y aliados que han hecho posible esta edición de CAM 2023. Michelle, tú tienes un mensaje, tienes varios mensajes. Y antes de despedirnos, recuerden que tenemos un cóctel de clausura en el piso 6, en el Salón D6, que estaremos celebrando el éxito de esta edición. Queda con ustedes Michelle de la Osa, la presidenta del comité organizador de CAN 2023.
Ante todo, quiero agradecerles a los patrocinadores de CAN 2023 por el apoyo. Gracias a los asistentes y a los miembros de la Cámara Marítima por haber asistido masivamente a este evento. Antes de cerrar, la Junta Directiva de la Cámara Marítima de Panamá queremos tener una invitación a aquellas empresas que se han inscrito en CAN 2023, invitarlos a que se inscriban y formen parte del gremio la Cámara Marítima de Panamá, un gremio que está proactivo tratando de mejorar y la calidad del servicio que presta Panamá como hub marítimo. Los invitamos, que la unión hace la fuerza y hacemos un trabajo para beneficiar al hub marítimo. Es que a todas las empresas que están aquí, que no forman todavía parte de la Cámara Marítima, los exhortamos. Ahí está Rodrigo Hernández, que levante la mano. Levanta la mano. Él es en la Comisión de Relaciones con los Agremiados. Comisión de nuevos inscritos. Él va a estar muy dispuesto a atender sus solicitudes para ser miembro de la Cámara Marítima de Panamá. Y les reitero que el cóctel de clausura es en el 6º piso para los full pass, invitados especiales, todos los patrocinadores en el 6º piso, gracias a Panama Ports Company, que está patrocinando el cóctel de clausura. No quiero extenderme, solamente agradecerle el apoyo en estos 9 meses que termina hoy, en estos momentos, y bueno, a festejar en el 6º piso. Hasta pronto.